If you are just getting started on your YouTube journey, today I'm sharing 50 tiny tips for you as a YouTube beginner. So grab your cup of tea and let's dive into it. I started my own YouTube channel at the start of this year, and I've been researching tips on YouTube for probably about a year now. And what I have found is that there is some incredible advice out there from some of the biggest creators in the world. But I sometimes feel like they don't spend enough time on those little details that are more relevant when you are just getting started on YouTube. So my goal for this episode is to give you all of those tiny little gems in one place so that you can get stuck into creating your content. Now we have a lot to get through in this episode, so I'm going to be breaking this down into 4 key sections. We're going to be talking about tips for your planning, for your filming, for your editing, and for your publishing. So let's dive into tip number 1. Tip number 1 in planning for your YouTube channel is to build your second brain. This idea of a second brain is something that Tiago Forte popularized in his book, Building a Second Brain. And it is based on the concept that your best ideas or the best information that you need doesn't necessarily come to you at the time that you need it the most. So you have to create a system that is external to your own brain that captures those ideas or captures that information so that you can use it later when the time is right. So your ideas for your YouTube channel might come to you when you are exercising, when you are reading, when you are talking to other people, or maybe when you are watching other videos. So create a system that allows you to capture those ideas immediately. I personally use the Notes app in my phone to write down all of the ideas that I have for YouTube episodes, and then I can go back to them when I am deciding on which ones to work on. Tip number 2 is to start with your topic, your title, and your thumbnail. All of the biggest creators will tell you that this is the most important element of your YouTube videos, but the best creators will highlight that it is most important to actually start the beginning of your process with these elements rather than thinking about your thumbnail or your title, for instance, as an afterthought when you are finishing up your video. When you are trying to decide on your potential topic, think about how you are addressing what your audience may be interested in. Without a great title, topic, or thumbnail, then it is unlikely that even your best efforts with your video is going to get any views. So think about what your audience might actually be wanting to click on. What are their pain points? What are their interests? What do you notice that your potential audience is talking about or is interested in? You can also look up videos in your potential topic idea and see how these have performed. You also want to think about the total addressable market for your topic idea. The bigger the total addressable market, the more likely that you may be able to get views on your video. However, the competition in this space may also be higher. That's why you also hear so much advice about the value of niching down with your topics. What you also might like to do is consider how you can take your niche topic and see how it can align to something that has a larger total addressable market. So you might be talking about a niche idea within that bigger topic. This is an adjacent niche, and this might allow you to expand your reach and to draw people into your own channel. Tip number 3 for planning your YouTube channel is to solve a problem. When you are thinking about your title, your topic, and your thumbnail, you don't actually want to be creating clickbait. You want to be creating ideas that meet your audience's needs. Remember that YouTube is the second biggest website in the world, and it is second only to Google, who actually own YouTube. And remember that YouTube is also a search engine. It means that it is the second biggest search engine in the world. So what is your audience potentially searching for on Google? You can open up a private tab in your browser and start to type in the first words of your topic and see what the rest of the search engine suggestions are saying. This will give you an idea of what the most popular topics are related to your idea that people are searching for. You can also use Google Trends to give you an idea about if that potential topic receives a lot of traffic. You can use the YouTube filters on this as well. You can also see when there are certain peak times across the year so that you know if your particular topic has an optimal time for you to share it. You can also go into your YouTube analytics and click on the inspiration tab, and this will give you more ideas as to what content your audience may be searching for. If you start your YouTube channel with a focus on how-to content, then you are putting yourself in that mind frame of solving a problem for your audience. Number 4 for planning your YouTube channel is to consider being evergreen with a touch of trend. Evergreen content is content that is timeless, and compared to a lot of its counterparts in the social media space, YouTube actually rewards quality evergreen content. It's the reason why videos that were created maybe years ago are still suggested to you when you are looking up a certain topic on YouTube. But there's also something to be said for considering the value of trending content, because this is content that is particularly timely to your audience's interests or needs. And by adding your unique point of view to that conversation, you can deliver something that your audience is interested in while also potentially increasing your own reach. So for example, this is why content that is focused on, say, goal setting is really popular in December and January because it meets the audience where they are at. What I personally like to do is consider always having my episodes be timeless topics, but where possible, relating that to the trend that is most timely. So talking about those things at the time of the year that I think my audience might be most interested in them. Tip number 5 is to fight for your first 5 seconds. A lot of people will tell you that the most important part of your YouTube video is the first 30 seconds or the first minute of your video, but I prefer to narrow this down to the first 5 seconds. This is what Stephen Bartlett talks about in his book, Diary of a CEO. He talks about the first 5 seconds being critical in earning your audience's attention. So the first 5 seconds of your YouTube episode is the hook of your episode. 2 of the most important metrics when it comes to YouTube is your click-through and your retention. And retention actually can drop almost immediately after those first 5 seconds because your audience's filters are deciding whether or not they want to stay around for your video, whether they are interested in what you have to say or do, or if they are tuning you out as what Stephen Bartlett calls wallpaper. So even if you don't want to write scripts for your video, consider your hook or your first 5 seconds of your episode being something that you do actually script beforehand. Tip number 6 for planning your YouTube episode is to create a structure. There is this idea in speaking and presenting that you should tell people what you are going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. People generally like to avoid uncertainty. So when you have a structure or a framework to follow, you create just a little level of psychological safety for your audience. They understand what is to be expected from that particular video. Having a framework or a structure could actually also help your retention. Humans naturally want to close any open loops that they have in their mind. So if they know that there is other information that is still to come, there is a feeling of a fear of missing out on the other things that they already know are a part of that video. This is why videos that are based on, say, listicles or chapters or frameworks can be really popular. Tip number 7 is to habit stack your continuous upskilling on YouTube. To actually be a creator on YouTube, make sure that you are also a consumer of YouTube. How is YouTube a part of your daily routine, for example? I like to ensure that I am watching at least a few videos on YouTube as part of my lunch break, for example. I watch YouTube videos about YouTube, and I also watch videos related to my areas of interest or expertise. I also, in my downtime, will then also engage with other videos that are seemingly completely unrelated to my areas of interest in terms of my work. And I will see how there are any potential ideas that I can pull from these areas and actually make relevant to my own areas of interest and expertise. Tip number 8 for the planning stages of your YouTube channel or your YouTube episodes is to learn the art of writing. The best communication often begins with writing, and there is actually a bit of writing involved when it comes to a YouTube channel. For example, you have to write your thumbnails, you have to write your title, you have to write in the YouTube descriptions. And by learning the art of copywriting or writing in general, you will be able to stand out from the rest of the competition. I actually started writing my blog before I actually started creating my YouTube channel. And I still write my blog every single week, and it gives me a chance to synthesize some of the ideas and the information and the research that I have for an episode in a way that is really clear, and it makes delivering the episode then for YouTube much easier to do. Writing will also help you to develop your storytelling skills, which can also be a really critical part of your YouTube channel's success. So now we're going to move into the tips for the filming stages of your YouTube channel. And tip number 9 is the 1% rule. The 1% rule is something that I heard from mega creator Ali Abdaal. And in it, he said to just aim to get 1% better with every single video. And these could be the most tiny little changes that help you be that 1% better than you were in the last video. Just some of the ideas that I have had in this space for what the little 1%ers can be for your video include things like, for example, in the planning stages, trying a different topic or maybe a series idea. Or it could be adding more search engine optimization to your script, and I'll talk about this a bit more later. Or in the filming stages, you might like to improve your framing, to project more energy, to improve your eye contact, to improve your lighting, to improve your posture. Maybe you are using your hand gestures more. Maybe you can add more emotion to your closing and your call to action. Maybe you're varying your tone a little bit more. Maybe you're bringing in a prop, or maybe you're just elevating one thing in your backdrop. And those are just some of the ideas. And if you think about this as just the little tiny tweaks, they are probably hundreds of things that you can think of in this space. Number 10 for the filming stages of your YouTube channel is to be a relentless experimenter. Even just these tiny 1% adjustments to your YouTube episodes can have potentially a huge impact. Stephen Bartlett, again in his book Diary of a CEO, talks about being a relentless experimenter and aiming to out-fail the competition. This isn't about just embracing failure as it comes. This is about relentlessly pursuing experimentation. He says failure and intervention are inseparable twins. To invent, you have to experiment. And if you know in advance that it's going to work, it's not an experiment. So for all of those 1% tweaks, assess what impact they might be having. Just think about you being in science class in school and having to adjust those variables and seeing what impact they were having. Tip number 11 for the filming stages of your YouTube video is don't batch record. I know that this is really popular advice that comes from a lot of YouTube creators, and I understand where it comes from because filming is hard and it takes a lot of momentum to be able to bring yourself to film. And so if you are going to spend all of that time setting up and getting ready, then you want to make the most of that opportunity. but I don't personally recommend it. And that is because every day that you wake up, you have more knowledge and more ideas than you had the previous day. Well, every week you have more information about your topic of expertise than you had the previous week. So I personally feel like when you batch record, say a month in advance, you lose that opportunity to bring your most current relevant skills and knowledge to your YouTube video. By not batch recording, you can also respond more quickly to the most relevant and most up-to-date needs of your audience and the changing world around you. Tip number 12 is to work weeks ahead. So while I don't recommend batch recording your YouTube episodes, I do recommend trying to be at least a couple of episodes ahead of your publishing schedule. This just means that if an emergency was to come up, you still have some videos saved for a rainy day that you can publish and stay consistent for your audience. This could also be helpful for those days where you just can't bring yourself to record anything new. Recording videos actually takes quite a bit of energy for most people, and some days it might just feel too difficult to be able to show up. But if you have a video that is ready to go, your audience won't actually know that it is something that you prepared earlier. Because my content is evergreen, this is a method that works for me. And what I find is that being even just a couple of weeks ahead of my actual publishing schedule allows me to further work on that idea and perfecting its packaging a little bit more. For example, working more on the thumbnail and the title for that particular episode. My tip number 13 is to work within Parkinson's Law. Parkinson's Law is this idea that your work will expand to the amount of time that you have available for it. And if you reduce the amount of time, then you will still be able to get that same thing done in that time frame. Keep this in mind for all of the stages of your YouTube videos. So remember Parkinson's Law when it comes to the filming stage of your videos and also the other stages as well. You don't want to have a diminishing return on all of the efforts that you are putting in to the various stages of your YouTube process. Tip number 14 for the filming stages of your YouTube channel is to space your background strategically. Try and, if you can, allow for at least a few feet between you and your background. This will create just a little bit more of a depth of feel, and it looks just slightly more professional than if you are right up against your background. It's just a nicer experience for your audience. You could also potentially be strategic with how your items are placed around you. For example, you can create more of a focal point around you that draws your audience into you and what you are saying. Tip number 15 is to reduce the echo. Keep in mind that the more hard surfaces that you have around you, the more it is going to echo in your video. And also the bigger the room, the more this could potentially echo in your video. So if you have a room that has carpet that you can film in, or you can bring in a carpet into the room that you want to film in, then consider doing this. Carpet is going to help to absorb an echo, while hard surfaces will cause it to bounce around more. Close any doors around you to help to reduce background noise. I personally use iMovie to edit my videos, and there is a feature in there where you can just tick a box to reduce background noise. And while this doesn't completely work miracles, I find that the result when I do this compared to the audio before is worlds apart for me personally. Tip number 16 is to layer your lighting. If you have a light in your space, or you can bring some in, consider turning these on for your YouTube videos, because it will help to create a little bit of ambiance or a bit more of a warmer experience for your audience. Tip number 17 is to place objects of interest. If you watch my other episodes, you know that this piano sits here for all of my episodes, and that is actually where it lives in my day-to-day life as well. Yes, I do tidy up around me when I am filming an episode, but I actually intentionally leave this here because I know that it adds a little bit of personality to my videos. It tells you something about my interests and what I do without me having to say it. It's a way to show instead of tell. So consider in your own space, how you might use your backdrop and certain props maybe around you to allow your videos to tell stories about you. Tip number 18 is to create contrast. The human eye loves contrast. It is why this is one of the most critical elements when it comes to visual design. But keep this in mind for your YouTube videos as well. For example, how is what you are wearing creating contrast with your background? You want to be able to pop in your background and create a focal point for your audience. This idea of contrast is also going to be really important for your thumbnail design as well. Tip number 19 is to make time for hair and makeup. This is something that I really feel like doesn't get talked about enough. But when you start a YouTube channel, you often want to make sure that you look your best and that you feel your best, more importantly, as well. So you want to factor in your planning stages the time that it takes for you to turn up on YouTube as your most presentable version of yourself, or the way that you want your audience to see you. Over time, I've learned to love this part of the process. You can see this as your own sort of movie star moment before showing up on YouTube. You're spending time with yourself in hair, makeup, wardrobe. I like to personally pop a podcast on, or if I'm feeling a little bit flat, I will put on a pump up playlist that will help me to get the energy that I need to be able to show up in YouTube videos. Tip number 20 in your YouTube filming is to prioritize audio over visuals. If you have any budget at all to invest in your YouTube channel, consider spending it on a microphone. There are microphones to suit all kinds of budgets. Jump onto YouTube to have a look at initial recommendations and then reviews on the ones that you are most interested in. You can then have a look at how this is priced on Amazon, for example, or compare that to your local providers. I bought this mic for around $100 from a local provider following some of the research that I had done from YouTube creators. Tip number 21, if you are filming on your phone, is to use the main camera of your phone, so not the selfie mode. Now, when you are first starting on YouTube, it's likely that you are going to feel more comfortable being able to see yourself when you are filming. But try and get used to, from the get-go, using that more powerful camera, because you will get a better visual for your videos right from the get-go for your audience. Tip number 22 is to clean your lens. There is nothing worse than having worked through all of the nerves that you have prior to filming, only to find that when you are done, that you didn't actually clean your lens and the quality of your footage isn't what it could potentially be. Make it a part of your setup process to make sure that you are cleaning your lens. Try and make it a habit. Tip number 23 is try and get your eyes level with the camera. If you are filming talking head videos, for example, try and be as obsessive as you can about this detail. Nobody likes to feel like they are being talked down to. So if you try and get your eyes to be as level with the camera as possible, this gives you a greater chance of being able to connect with your audience through a screen. Tip number 24 is to check that you are lights, camera, and action ready. Again, filming can be stressful and you don't want to go through all of that again once you're done, because you find that not everything was turned on or plugged in. So make sure, if you do have equipment, that it is fully charged, that your microphone is on, that your lights are on, and that you are actually recording. All of this can sound like it is potentially really simple things, but I say this having done all of them. And these little faux pas are the little things that can cause you to lose momentum in your filming process. Tip number 25 is to look into your lens. Get used to making sure that you are actually looking directly into the lens. And this tip applies even if you are using your phone to capture, say, photos for your thumbnail and you're doing that on selfie mode, for example. Get used to making sure that you are looking into the lens, because it gives you a chance to connect directly to your audience. It is a very subtle detail that you will notice in more of the editing stages and in your final result that you might not necessarily pick up on when you are recording. Tip number 26 is to record in segments. You don't have to just press record and keep rolling until you're done. You can actually break this down into segments, and you may not realize it, but it's likely what some of your favorite YouTubers are doing. By recording in segments, this allows you to make sure that everything has worked. It allows you to have a little bit of a break between sections, and it allows you to refer back to any sort of script that you might have. So you might record in segments based on the script or the plan that you have for your video. Don't worry about those little jump cuts between your segments. This is actually really common across YouTube, especially with talking head videos, and it just makes your videos seem more authentic, and authenticity is certainly something that is really trending on YouTube at the moment. If you did want to smooth over some of those jump cuts, you can do this in your editing process simply by adding B-roll footage or by zooming in and out in different cuts to smooth over some of that transition. Tip number 27 is to talk with your hands. Learn to talk intentionally with your hands. This will add another level of communication to your videos. It will help your audience to process your point better. Think about this as show and tell for adults, for example. By taking up space, this can actually project confidence as well, instead of appearing small and projecting any nervousness that you might be feeling. Research has shown that taking up space can actually help your confidence. By expanding your body, you can learn to fake it until you actually feel it. Tip number 28 is to close with intention. There is a lot of focus on YouTube about the opening of your video, but there seems to be less conversation around the closing of your video. Some people can have these really long-winded outros that most people just would not want to stick around for. There is a lot to be said for a cold close. Think about this as being like the cliffhanger in your favorite TV show. It leaves you feeling a little bit on the edge and like you wanted just a little bit more. But there's also something to be said for a warm close, and this is a close that is going to be a lot more heartfelt. You've really thought about the message that you want to leave your audience with. This might feel more like leaving a chat with a friend, for example. Tip number 29 is to have a call to action. YouTube allows you to have up to 2 videos suggested at the end of your YouTube video. But just because you can doesn't mean that you necessarily should. Remember that when you confuse them, you lose them, and you usually only have a few seconds to be able to convince them to take that next step and to continue to keep watching your channel. Think about this same concept as well when you are giving any sort of verbal call to action as well. A lot of people like to encourage people to like, subscribe, to comment, but again, this confuses your audience because you are making too many requests of them. Make sure that you are being really clear about that one thing that you most want your audience to do. If you do want to have other call to actions, then think about including this as secondary elements throughout your video. My tip number 30, which is the last tip for the filming section of this episode, is to capture your thumbnail when you are filming. This allows you to keep that momentum going. I used to capture my thumbnail prior to recording, and I then realized that I enjoyed doing it more afterward because even though I was potentially a little bit tired from recording, I was also excited to have had the recording element done. So I wanted to be able to capture just a little bit more of this excited energy as opposed to the nervous energy before actually filming. If you are using your phone on selfie mode to capture your thumbnail, then change the dimensions to the 16:9 ratio because this will then allow it to fit more easily with the dimensions of a YouTube thumbnail as opposed to the normal default setting of a photo. And this relates to an iPhone. I'm not entirely actually sure how this applies to other phones, but see if you can play around with those settings to make it more useful for you when you are starting to edit your thumbnail. So now we are leading into the tips relating to editing. And tip number 31, if you can manage it, is to do an immediate rough cut. I've heard a lot of creators talk about filming on one day and then coming back to edit on a different day. I do understand the thinking behind this because editing and filming is likely going to relate to different parts of your brain and it requires you to be in a different mindset. But what I have found works for me is to immediately import all of that footage that I have onto my laptop and just at least double check that everything that I need is there and everything has worked properly, even if this is really rough to begin with. That way I can see if there's anything that needs to be re-recorded and I can jump back into doing that immediately while I am still somewhat in that frame of mind and in the zone to be filming. Once I have done that, however, I will have a break because like I said, editing and filming use very different parts of your brain. So you really want to make sure that you are switching in to that different mindset when it comes to editing and giving yourself a break because it can actually take a lot of energy to be able to show up on camera. Tip number 32 is to adjust your volume in the editing stage. If you're anything like me, you will likely have to turn up your volume a little bit in your editing. Just make sure that it is not doing what is called peaking, which is when you see the volume having gone past that optimal level of noise. Tip number 33 is don't over edit. If you are just starting out on YouTube, then the current under editing trend is your greatest opportunity. Sometimes our pursuit of perfectionism when it comes to videos can actually lead to procrastination, and it might actually mean that we don't ever end up hitting publish at all or in a timely way. I like to think of marketing guru Seth Godin's advice to ship your work. This under editing trend is a really great opportunity to be able to connect with your audience in a more relatable and authentic way. I personally edit all of the graphics that I use in my YouTube videos just using the free version of Canva. And if I do require any B-roll footage, I will make a note of what these are and I will take them as a part of my day-to-day life. I've also heard some people recommend to just take footage as a part of your day-to-day life anyway and then save these into a B-roll bank. That way you have access to these if these are topics that you might ever want to pull upon for your videos. Tip number 34 is to aim for an ideal video length. If you have a certain range that you normally aim for your videos, then over time you start to establish expectations with your audience and they can plan consuming your content into their own lives. By having an ideal video time frame as well, you can automatically increase the quality of your edit because you have to be more ruthless about what gets included and what gets cut out of your videos. But also keep in mind that you still want to be able to experiment from time to time. For example, I would normally share videos that are around 10 to 15 minutes, but I really wanted to be able to deep dive into this particular topic for my audience. So when you are coming up with what your ideal time frame is, consider what the psychographics is of your audience and what they might most need. What is it that they will likely be doing in the time that you want them to be watching your video? How much time do you estimate that they might actually have? If you are planning to have your YouTube channel hopefully be monetized, at the time of filming this video, videos that are 8 minutes or longer will allow you to have a mid-roll ad in them as well. So it's just something to keep in mind if that is something that you're planning for the future. You could also decide to have consistent video lengths within different types of videos that you produce or different series. So while they might vary across your channel overall, there is some sort of consistency to that sort of video. Tip number 35 in editing for your YouTube channel is to do a spelling special edit. Spelling errors can hurt your credibility, but they also can be really hard to spot when you are in that editing process. So try and make sure that you are specifically looking at one final edit with a view of spelling errors or any grammatical errors or any typos in mind. This will help you to see anything that you might have missed as potential blind spots throughout your editing process. Ideally, you also want to make sure that you have some sort of break before you do this so you are coming back to your screen with fresh eyes. Tip number 36 is to do an immediate thumbnail draft edit. There is no real technical reason why I do this, but I like to finish my filming and editing process with my thumbnail because I feel like it is a nice way to get into that zone of packaging up your video after all of the effort of those other stages. I don't actually ever completely finish my thumbnail in that first draft. As I mentioned, I come back to it after a period of time with fresh eyes and to see if there's any improvements that can be made to the packaging of the video. Tip number 37 is to have exclusion zones for your thumbnail. When you are editing your thumbnail, keep in mind the areas that you don't want to have any key elements or any key text in. For example, the right-hand corner of your thumbnail, because this is where the YouTube timestamp will go. And also depending on where you plan to have your video show most, maybe it's on your website, maybe it is the way that you expect your audience to view it more, consider what elements need to actually be considered as a part of that as being a part of the exclusion zones. Tip number 38 is to create a focal point. Now this can apply with the way that you frame your video when you are editing your video and also to your thumbnail. For example, just with a very simple click of a button, Canva allows you to add an autofocus effect, which you can also adjust the intensity of as well. You can also separate out the background and the foreground and change the contrast of this too, which will allow you or the most important elements of your thumbnail to be able to pop against that background and to give your audience a focal point. Tip number 39, which is the last tip for the editing stage, is to do a scale test of your thumbnail. Just because your thumbnail might look really great on your laptop or on your big screen, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will look exactly how you want it to on mobile, which is the place that most people are going to be consuming your YouTube video. So when you are designing your thumbnail, scale it down to the size that it will most likely appear when it is on a mobile device and see that all of the key elements are still legible. You might like to do this on Canva just by clicking in the right-hand corner of the normal editing screen, which will scale this down for you so you can see if anything noticeably needs to be addressed. And we have arrived at the home stretch of your YouTube channel tips, and we are getting into the publishing tips now. Tip number 40 is to set up the shopfront window for your YouTube channel. When someone clicks onto your YouTube channel, what is the shopfront window for your YouTube channel? What is the value proposition that your channel is communicating to them to make them want to continue watching or to subscribe to your channel? Does your channel, for example, in your profile banner include photos that maybe show your credibility? Maybe you have done speaking events, maybe you have a book, maybe it shows another really clear call to action, or maybe it has another value proposition as a part of that. For example, I share in my YouTube profile banner that I share a new episode every Monday. So what is the value that your audience sees when they go onto your channel to make them want more from you? Tip number 41 is to time your release. Just because you have a great idea for a video doesn't mean that it is necessarily the best time for your audience to see that particular video. This isn't about hoarding the work that you have already done, but making sure that even in those planning stages, you are thinking about the time that that video will be published and assessing whether that is the right time for your audience and if there is a better time for that to fit in to their schedule and their interests. For example, the word diet is known to skyrocket on Google in January because this meets a lot of people's interests at the time. This is where, going back to what I mentioned at the start of this episode, you can use Google Trends to work out when the optimal time is to publish certain ideas. You can use the date range functions and the YouTube filters again to help you with this. You can use this to see the peaks and the troughs in the level of interest for particular topics at different times. There's usually a right time for everything and a certain time when people are more receptive to ideas. It's like that saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Tip number 42 is to pay attention to the title length of your video. YouTube will allow you to have a title length that is up to 100 characters. But again, just because you can doesn't mean that you necessarily should. Keep in mind that the number of characters that can be displayed, including spaces, in the YouTube preview mode of your video is 70 characters. So see if you can make sure that you are keeping your title, or at least the most important elements of your title, to this character limit. But keep in mind that you can experiment as well. I, for example, sometimes include longer video titles and include less important information in that back end of my title if I think that it is going to add value to the viewer if they were to be interested in clicking on that video, or if it is going to have potentially some search engine optimization value as well. But experiment with this for yourself, because I've also heard some people mention that video titles that are too long could potentially hurt your video too. So keep an eye on what is working or not working for you. My tip number 43 is to search engine optimize your YouTube title, description, and your tags. If you are just getting started on YouTube, then search engine optimization is going to be your best opportunity at being discovered by people that you might not already know. Think about this even during the scripting part of your YouTube video process as well, because YouTube can actually pick up on what is being said in your videos. What are the keywords that you want your video to be able to target? Think about how you can naturally incorporate this into your video, and then think really strategically about how you include this into your thumbnail in a way that is going to be not only valuable for your viewer, but valuable from an SEO perspective. Personally, when I am drafting the description in my YouTube videos, I like to give myself a benchmark of around at least 100 words, just to make sure that this has a little bit of substance to it, both from an SEO perspective and from the perspective of delivering value for the viewer as well. Tip number 44 is to commit to consistency. One of the biggest challenges when it comes to creating any content is to create consistency. But try and take some of the decision fatigue out of the process by committing to a particular day and a particular frequency that you will upload every single time. For example, as I mentioned, I share videos every Monday morning. What is your consistency that you can actually manage sustainably in your lifestyle as well? This consistency will also help to establish expectations with your audience, because they are being primed to understand what to expect from you. And you can also apply this concept of consistency to when you plan your videos, when you film them, when you edit them. If you are scheduling the time that you will do that, then you are creating more of a habit around those things. That's once again why I don't recommend batching, because if you are doing something in just one time in the month, then you are not actually establishing the habit that relates to that thing. Jerry Seinfeld, for example, famously promotes that if you want to be a writer, you should be writing every day, and that you are never going to establish a habit for something that you are only ever doing every once in a while. So how can you make the entire process of YouTube a regular part of your routine that takes all of that decision making out of the process? Tip number 45 is to create a signature look and feel. In branding, one of the golden rules is consistency. So what is the visual identity of your YouTube channel? For example, research has shown that adding a color can improve brand recognition by up to around 90%. So think about how your audience can recognize your content in their busy feeds, or how they can have a more consistent experience across your different videos. We are down to the last 5 tips, and tip number 46 is to manually add chapters. There is often a debate about adding chapters or not adding chapters to your videos. Some people say that if you don't add chapters, then your audience will have to watch the entire video instead of just knowing what is coming up and deciding to click off or to click around. But I think when you are creating videos with your audience in mind, then adding chapters makes the most sense because you want them to have the best experience. That way they can click off if the video is not something that is suited to them, or they can skip around to the sections that are going to be of most value to them instead of actually just coming off of the video altogether. And this can actually help your retention overall. If you don't know how to manually add chapters to your video, this is actually done in the description of your video when you go to upload it. So in that description, somewhere in that section, you want to include a 0:00 with the word intro after it. Then you start a new line for the next chapter. So put what the timestamp is for that next chapter and what you want to name that chapter, and then go on to the next line and so on. And what is generally recommended at this stage anyway is to make sure that you don't have the automatic chapters box checked, just in case this is picking up the wrong chapters. So by doing it manually, you can help to ensure that this is correct for your audience. Tip number 47 is to decide on your distribution strategy. One of the best ways to get people onto your YouTube channel is to send them there from your other digital channels or your other social media platforms, like your Instagram, your TikTok, or your LinkedIn, for example. YouTube is one of those things that a lot of people can feel really hesitant to actually join, and it takes for a lot of people a certain level of having overcome some limiting beliefs relating to showing up on camera. So decide if you want to build your YouTube channel in public or in silence. And by that I mean you don't necessarily need to tell your closest friends, your family, or your former friends, or your wider friendship circle or colleagues that you have a YouTube channel. It might be something that you keep to yourself, because sometimes when we share these things with our friends and our family, it can put these subconscious limits on what we are willing to do on those things, because we are too worried about the people that we know seeing those things. And it seems sometimes less scary when it isn't people that we know as well. So consider if that is something that you want to consider as a part of your YouTube channel's distribution strategy. If you, for example, invite a lot of your friends and family to subscribe to your YouTube channel when you launch it, this might not necessarily help the performance of your channel. It could actually end up hurting it if your friends and family aren't actually interested in that topic. Because when you post a video, YouTube is going to assess if your subscribers are actually interested in that. And if your subscribers have just joined your channel to support you, but they don't actually want to engage in your content, then that actually isn't helping your YouTube channel and it could be hurting it. Tip number 48 is to repurpose your efforts. Compared to a lot of its counterparts, YouTube is a really high effort platform. So you want to make sure that you squeeze out all of the potential that you have in every single episode for other purposes. For example, you might want to turn a particular episode into a blog post. You might want to extract the audio like I do and use it for a podcast. This might also help you to reach new audiences because you are connecting with them in the way that they might like to best consume your content. You might also consider creating short form content from your video. You might cut your YouTube video to create shorts that have standalone value for your YouTube channel as well. You might also take concepts from your YouTube video and create a graphic or a carousel for that, like I often do for LinkedIn. You're taking that long form piece and converting it into a short form piece that might also draw people in to your long form content over time. You can leverage your social media or your other digital platforms or your email newsletter, for example, to let your audience know when you are live, which leads nicely into tip number 49, which is to be your first viewer. Now, if you are getting into a very consistent content creation schedule, then you are likely going to be scheduling a lot of your YouTube videos. But just because you are scheduling your videos, try and avoid a set and forget approach when it comes to your video going live. See if you can jump on and be your first viewer. I find this a really good way to look at your video from the perspective of your viewer with fresh eyes when it goes live. And it probably doesn't even hurt your retention to have you be your first viewer because you are watching all of the way through your video as well. I also find that if there is any mistakes that you absolutely want to correct, if you are your first viewer, then you still have time to take this down and to re-upload again. Tip number 50 is to arrange your YouTube channel in playlists. When you came up with your YouTube strategy, you likely picked some key pillars that you wanted your content to be able to fall within. So consider arranging your YouTube playlists around these key pillars or around content types or around series ideas that you might have. By doing this, you create a much better user experience for your audience, and you also encourage them to be able to watch videos related to the things that they are most interested in. And that brings me to the end of my 50 tiny tips for YouTube beginners. If you have found any of this valuable, then do please let me know by subscribing. Thanks so much, and I wish you all the best in your YouTube journey.